Hello, it's Nick with OYA Knowledge, and I'm going to do a video now on primary staff, primary GLC staff, because this is something that I'm getting a lot of questions about currently, and I'm just going to give you my thoughts on what a primary staff is, what they do, why we need them, and why the role is valuable. So, primary GLC staff, what is that all about? So, context and history. When I started with the agency in 1999, I was 21, or maybe I just turned 22. I'll think back then. Let's see. Well, I'm 42 this year, and this is my 20th year, so I had just turned 22. There you go. It's all settled. And I worked on Hall Cottage, which is now the Fossil unit at McLaren, but back then it was Hall. And we had 27 youth and basically 2 staff. Every once in a while we had a third staff. On weekends we had third staff, but that was the dynamic. 27 and 2, and that's the world that I was introduced in for OYA. It was also one of the first quote-unquote DOC unit, or from adult corrections, was also a phrase that was used back then to label youth that were convicted as adults but allowed to stay in OYA. And this unit, Hall, had the first group of guys that were sentenced under Measure 11. So, previous to that, obviously there was youth that could be sentenced as adults, but Measure 11 was the tough on crime bill that was passed in Oregon, and that unit that I worked on had the first young man from Multnomah County to be sentenced under Measure 11, and the first one from Marion County to be sentenced under Measure 11. When I first started working, I had at least 5 guys that were older than I was. So I just told you that I was 22, and so these 5 guys were 22 and older. They weren't terribly older than me. Obviously we can only keep them until they're 25, and most of them, were born within the same year or within a year. But anyway, that was kind of how I was introduced to working as a GLC on Hall Cottage. And okay, so this video is about primary staff. So immediately I was assigned primary youth. 1999, 20 years ago, primary youth. This isn't a new concept. Right, I ran into somebody who is leading a team, and they're struggling to get their staff team bought into the primary concept, and it was repeated to me, this is new, so we got to give it time. This is not a new concept. This has been a basic expectation for the group life coordinator for 20 years, at least for my 20 years, right? So let me explain what my primary duties looked like back in 1999. So I had 3 to 4 young men, and we would divvy up primary youth amongst our staff team during staff meetings, and which we had monthly staff meetings. And during the staff meeting, if you felt like as a staff things weren't clicking for you with a particular youth, you could bring it up to the team, and sometimes we would make adjustments to that, or sometimes you would find out other information from other staff that have known the kid longer, or maybe in different contexts, to give you pointers about how to connect with them. So 3 to 4 youth were assigned to you as a primary staff, and here's the duties as I remember them in that primary staff role. So yes, of course, you would be the point of contact for that youth for things like phone calls, things like advocating for you in staff meetings to receive a improved tag level. You took it upon yourself to have knowledge about family members and the family dynamic to pass on, to support things like visiting and family days and that type of stuff. You may be one that would search through, or give access to personal property if there was such things, or make the request for that. But basically, anything that was outside of the normal everyday basics of group living, the primary staff would handle those things. Now, that model seems to still be intact some places, right? Where the primary staff gets reduced to the person that makes phone calls for a particular youth, okay? I know some units don't operate with that at all, but I know that that's kind of how it's devolved over time. So in addition to all of that stuff, as a primary staff back in 1999, we were required to have 2 meaningful check-ins with each of those youth that were assigned to us. So 3 to 4 youth. So I'll go on the high end. So that meant that I needed to have 8 meaningful check-ins per week with the youth that I worked with. Okay? And then you had to document that check-in, which back in 99, this is pre-JAGIS days, meant that I had to write it in the logbook, right? And I had to comment on the youth grade sheet that we had a primary check-in, and in a sentence or 2 summarize the discussion. But in the logbook, it was more expected to be 1 to 2 paragraphs that would outline your check-in with that youth. Okay, so pre-JAGIS, pre-data entry, we were doing it in handwritten logs. Okay, 27 youth, 2 to 3 staff, 3 to 4 primaries. On the high end, that meant 8 check-ins per week. If I didn't have one of those check-ins, then I was meeting with my boss about it. And it wasn't to get me in trouble and to bash me for not doing my job. It was to review the expectation. You're expected to have 2 meaningful check-ins with these youth per week. When I look at your entries, you're short, so what's getting in the way? It was a problem-solving conversation, right? And sometimes it was, well, this guy's really mad at me, or I did something to tick him off, and we would problem solve. How do we mend relationships, right? And how do you get reconnected with that youth? And that was the process. So that's what it looked like in 1999. And let me give you what I think is the reason. Let me give you the why for primary staff, right? So the more that we can get to know the young men that we work with, the better off everything else is. Okay? I believe it's a fundamental human drive to know and be known, right? And one of the primary ways that you can let yourself be known or to get to know somebody else is to have conversations with them. Okay? It's one of the basic ways that has existed since humans knew how to develop the ability to speak, I would imagine. Okay? You have to have conversations. And what do you do in those conversations? Well, that's probably a whole nother video to give you content ideas, conversation starters. There's actually prompts for this on the OYA net right now. If you look under facility services, somewhere in the fundamental practices site, if I can find it, I'll put a link to it below in this video, so you can go right to it if you want some ideas for conversations, right? But I'll give you a basic outline for how do you get to know somebody. It's a skill, right? It's a skill that we as staff can learn. It's a skill that we can pass on to others. It's a skill that our youth need to know. And it's called FORM, F-O-R-M. And FORM is an acronym, and it is the basis for how to get to know somebody that you don't know at all. FORM, okay? So F stands for family. The O stands for occupation. But wait, Nick, these are kids. They don't have jobs. Use your head, use your imagination, okay? Use your head, use your imagination. I tell my kids that their job is to do well in school, okay? I think that's a reasonable expectation in this culture, in this society, that kids are expected to go to school and do well. In a lot of ways, that's like a job, right? You got to get up on time. You got to get to school on time. You got to take in instruction. You got to produce a product, make sure the product is delivered on time. That's homework. That's test exams. That's group projects, right? That's a job in all sense and purposes of the word. We just call it school, okay? So don't get hung up on these things. Don't get super literal and then throw the baby out with the bathwater, okay? Some of these guys have had jobs. All right, some of these guys have worked fast food. They've worked for family businesses, so you never know. They may have had a W-2 job at some point in time, okay, before coming to us. It's not out of the question. I've definitely seen it dozens of times in my career. Okay, so O, occupation or related to things that are developmentally focused and age appropriate to youth. Okay, maybe they had a pet that they had to take care of. I don't know, right? But think about things that these guys may have had to been responsible for, and check in on around those things. Just ask about it. Okay. R is recreation. What do you like to do for fun? Okay. The trap here is sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? So, yep, you're going to expect those kinds of answers from or responses from the guys, and it's your job to tilt that conversation into a positive direction. Okay. So, besides sex, drugs, and rock and roll, what do you like to do for fun? You may not hear a ton come out of them, right, in terms of things that are pro-social that they were into. That's good knowledge, right? This is the reason why on some units we introduce hobby groups, so that staff can show them pro-social things that won't get them in trouble, that they can take up an interest in and do, right? Positive pro-social leisure time activities is known to be one of the best things that anybody can do for themselves to prevent relapse, all kinds of relapse. Okay, so recreation, what did they like to do that was pro-social for fun? And then the M is message. Okay, so when you're having a conversation with somebody, it's always good to have a kind of overall message that you're trying to communicate with them, right? So if it's somebody that's brand new that you've never talked to before, the message is, hey, thanks for spending time with me. It's really good to get to know you a little bit more, and I look forward to other conversations with you, right? That's all the message has to be. If this youth is brand new to your living unit, then through the course of your conversation, your M for your message could be, well, I just wanted to spend some time with you. Welcome to this new living unit. This is my shift. I work on, like 3 2-10s and 2 6-2s. I'm going to be your primary staff. So again, I just want to welcome you to the living unit and let you know I'm here, that if you ever have questions or needs, I'll do my best to get to you. And in my absence, here's 2 other people I recommend that you go to, right? That's an M message, right? You're capping off the form skill with a overall message of welcome to the unit, and here's how can be available to help you. Okay, so let's go through it again. Primary staff, talking to youth. What do I talk about? Start with form. FORM. Family, occupation, recreation, message. Okay. Here's what I'm convinced about, particularly on the intake living units. If you work intake, there's on average 12 to 14 staff attached to a living unit, just depending on where you're at and your staffing pattern. But on intake, if all 12 staff, and let's add QMHP, CC, and LUM, so let's say 15 staff, and we'll take away the overnight person. Okay, so 14 staff. If every youth that came to intake got 14 form conversations, I would predict that the amount of incidents that unit has and that youth has would plummet down to, I'll just take a guess at it. Incident rates would drop by 80% if every staff attached to a living unit would take the time to form. And this is in the course of 45 days, right? 45 to 90 days, or 45 to 60 days, the average stay on intake, right? So that means each staff in 60 days would need to find time to have one form conversation with a particular kid, right? So again, my prediction is that if we were to do that, have 14 form conversations with every youth on intake, incidents would plummet in a positive way. And as that youth then transferred onto their long-term living unit, they would already be primed for the idea that staff care about them and they want to know about them. What a handoff that would be coming out of our intake living units. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't happen in pockets and waves, because absolutely it does, right? But I'm talking about a collective buy-in into the primary staff role and relationship that they can have with youth, right? So let's capitalize on the idea that incidents would plummet. So here's a big reason why to have primary staff and have them engaging youth proactively weekly makes for a safer environment. Okay. Simon Baron Cohen put out a video that you can find on YouTube called 0 Degrees of Empathy. It's called these, so I gotta translate. 0 Degrees of Empathy, and I'll sum it up. It's about an hour. I recommend it. It's a must-watch if you're going to be in the social services field like we are. 0 Degrees of Empathy. I'll sum it up in one sentence. You treat people right that you view as being in your in group, and you're likely to treat people wrong, hurt them, harm them, lie to them, steal from them, to people that you view in your out group. Okay? In group versus out group. So when we take the time to have a forum type conversation with our youth, and in particular our primary youth, over time we will become part of their in group as a staff member, which means we are much less likely to be a target of their negative behavior, right? And if we had overall staff buy-in into this, then your staff team as a whole will become less likely to be the target of negative behavior from a particular youth and groups of youth as you make this part of how you work with them. So that's a big reason why primary staff ought to be vested in these proactive check-ins, because it serves to build a safer living unit, right? And if we had every living unit on campus doing that, then the campus would be safer. Okay? So as much emphasis as we put on safety as a GLC, and then matching that up with the reluctance for primary staff to have proactive, engaging conversations with youth, I don't know how much you actually value safety if you're not willing to do things like forum with youth, but that's just my opinion. I can reflect on, my time working the floor, and good relationships with youth lead to valuable information about other things that are going on, both on that unit and on campus. Okay, so that's another good reason to have a routine of establishing proactive connection with youth via the primary staff to youth model. Okay, the information that you can find out is invaluable. I learned a lot about what it meant to be a good GLC just by talking to the youth and listening to them and observing them, and then checking it out with them during my primary conversations, right? The youth ultimately are the recipients of the product that you provide as a GLC, and because they're the primary recipient, their feedback means something. It did to me, right? Talk about firm, fair, and consistent working in corrections. I think the consistency part is really what matters the most. And again, I'll probably save that for another video. Okay. So the other big hurdle with these primary check-ins is you have to document them. Right? Going back to my spiel in this video about handwritten logs, right? That's how I had to learn to document them. Wrote in cursive too. Dating myself there, right? But yeah, as a GLC staff, you've got to document it, okay? So if you could find 8 to 12 minutes to have a meaningful check-in with a primary, tack on 2 to 3 minutes to do your documentation, right? I haven't timed myself, but I'm willing to do it for how long it takes to log into JGIS, pull up a youth, and enter a note. Okay, so let me give you some ideas for that note. It doesn't have to be lengthy. It doesn't have to be like a treatment note that you might see QMHPs doing or C80C staff doing, right? It doesn't have to be like that. All it has to be is met with Youth Smith for primary check-in, discussed progress this week, reviewed an incident that led to the steps placement, developed a plan for improving for the next time a situation like this comes up. Okay? That's all it has to be. Here's another example. Checked in with Youth Marker regarding upcoming visit with family. Youth expressed some anxiety around seeing his aunt. We talked about ways to manage anxiety leading up to the visit and things that can be done during the visit to help him deal with anxiety and have the best visit possible. Okay? Simple as that. Here's another example. Met with Youth Martin. I was assigned to be the primary staff. Went through the form skill with Martin and found out he really likes to read and likes to read about history. Okay? That's all you got to put in a note, a sentence or two. So like I said, I haven't sat down to do a beginning to end time process to see how long it takes, but I'm guessing it doesn't take more than 2 to 3 minutes. Okay? So in today's environment, we're asking GLCs to have, again, 3 to 4 youth, to which they are the primary staff for. And I think we're only asking 1 check-in a week. Okay? So that means, let's just go with that. Let's go with 4 youth that you're assigned to as a primary staff, primary GLC staff, and you got to check in with each youth once a week. So if you're a GLC, you should be working 5 days, 5 shifts if you've got a super duper shift trade going on. I'm not a fan of those, by the way, particularly for this reason, right? It limits your ability to connect proactively with youth. That's my opinion. Okay? 5 days means 4 out of those 5 days, you've got to find 8 minutes to check in with your primary. Now, if it was me working the floor again, I would try to do all those in the same day of the week and set it up and schedule it, and that way I had it done for the week. But let's say you spread it out. You do 1 a day for 4 days out of the 5 that you work. 8 minutes. So that's a total of 32 minutes. Because what I hear is there's not enough time. It's not safe to leave the floor to talk to 1 youth. Those are the 2 primary objections that I hear. Oh, and I don't know what to talk about. Okay, those are probably the 3 things that I get either directly from GLC staff or from leaders that are leading teams of GLCs, right? There's not enough time, it's not safe, and I don't know what to talk about. Okay? So let's go through those. Not enough time. 32 minutes out of a 40-hour work week. 32 minutes. I'm just going to say it. You have the time. You absolutely have the time. I'm not going to go into a big, long explanation about how I'm convinced that I know that you have the time. I know that you have the time because I did the job. That should be all I need to say on that. Okay, you have the time. It's not safe. Yeah, when the unit is tense and things just don't feel right, maybe you just had a fight, maybe you just had an incident. Nobody's saying that's the perfect time to take a youth and do a one-on-one. Nobody's saying that. Absolutely, if things aren't safe, if things are feeling tense, then it needs to be all hands on deck on the floor. Okay? So you'll never hear me say sacrifice safety for the sake of doing a one-on-one with a youth. But I will say, the more that you as an individual GLC and as teams of GLC make this a priority to have proactive check-ins with your youth, your unit will become increasingly more safe. Okay? it is a positive correlation, right? The more positive engagement between the staff and the youth equals a safer living unit. Okay? It's just the way it is. So, in the moment to moment, things aren't safe. You just had an incident, or it feels like an incident could break out. Nobody's saying that that's the time to do a one-on-one. Okay? But I am saying that the more that you as a GLC and the more that your GLC team makes this a priority, proactive engagement with the youth, I'm absolutely convinced that your unit will become increasingly more safe. All right. I don't know what to talk about. Okay? So there's two broad categories that you can always talk about with anybody, including these youth, right? What's going well, what's going not so well. The magic here with teens is teens are often reluctant to give you much to go on, right? That's any teens, not just our teens here in a correctional facility, but even my own teens. I've got a 15-year-old and a soon-to-be 12-year-old, right? They are conditioned to give one-word answers. Okay? Here's another nugget of truth, okay? If you really want to know what somebody's thinking about something, you got to ask them 3 times, right? The first time, it's their response that's basically meant to get out of the conversation, okay? What's going well? Oh, mostly everything. Okay, well, that's a response that's designed to get them out of the conversation. Okay, pretty natural. So yeah, so we have this time to spend together, and I thought I would just check in on something that's gone well, maybe a goal that you've had that you've been making progress on, or something that surprised you in a positive way. So I'll ask you again, what's been going well? Well, I don't know. I guess I really haven't thought about it. Okay. Well, we can either give you a minute or two to think about it, or I've actually been looking through your grades and talking to your teachers and talking to the staff team. I have some ideas of what's been going well. What might be interesting for you? You want to take some time to think about it, or you want me to kind of kick it off with what I've been seeing that's been going well? Okay, that's one broad category. Pull out of that role play there, right? You can talk about what's going well, or you can talk about the obvious, what's not going well, right? Look at your downgrades. Look at any kind of negative behavior-based off-unit placements, right? Those are all opportunities to problem solve, see what could have gone better in those scenarios. Look for skills that either weren't used or weren't applied because the kid doesn't have the skill, and develop a plan to build that skill up. Okay, so what's going well, what's not going well, those are always 2 broad categories that you can use when you're talking to anybody. Okay, all right, so that's 28 minutes. I'll try to hit it 30-minute mark, and try to keep these about the 30-minute mark depending on the topic. So primary staff, the role, why it's important, and how to document. I think I covered all those things in this video. So I'm a firm believer that we are here as staff, and particularly as GLC staff, to show these young men and to model for them a different way, a positive way. And the more that we can be purposeful in demonstrating that for them through our conversations, the better results that we're going to have, right? This isn't something that we can just drop on them once and hope for it to do something. We have to keep exposing them to positivity, and a primary way that we can do that, is through primary staff conversations, right? Keep exposing them to the fact that they are capable, the fact that things do go well when they work hard, the fact that there is opportunity for them, and the fact that their life will continue to exist in a positive way if they choose it to be outside of the fences of McLaren. Okay, that's a huge piece of what we're trying to do as GLCs, right? You're the ones that spend the majority of the time with the youth, and you have the most leverage with them. And a big part that you can do is be proactive in your engagement and conversations with them. So I got 10 seconds left. Hey, this is Nick, OYA Knowledge. This was all about primary staff relationship with youth. Thanks for watching, and be sure to do something with this knowledge. All right, take care.